Mary Anning's Curiosity, Chapter 7, The Eye in the Cliff. Joe had stumbled upon the odd shape in the cliff quite by accident. Some days after work he went down to the beach to be close to Pa. Today he stood studying church cliffs, his mind filled with memories, when suddenly he noticed an unusual shape in the limestone. It looked like a large round dinner plate, or a monster's eye. Was it part of a large creature? Could it be the giant crocodile Pa had talked about for as long as Joe could remember? Or was the late afternoon light playing tricks on him? Joe stared at the saucer-sized shape. It stared back at him with a glare that made him shudder. He walked to the cliff and reached up to trace his finger around the outer edge. It might well be the beast, he murmured in awe. Had he, Joseph Anning, found the fossil other hunters had never had the good fortune to find? Pa had hunted for the creature all his life, convinced that the many vertebrates they'd found over the years were the vertebrae of the creature's enormous spine. Others might think these were nothing more than harmless curiosities, but Pa believed that the vertebrates were bits and pieces of a larger puzzle. If you could put them together, the individual pieces would make up the spine of a creature unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Joe thought back to the day, years ago, when Pa had brought home a large vertebrate, what some folks called a dragon's tooth. It was the size of a round loaf of bread. Pa had bent over and placed the vertebrate on his desk. "Can you see by its shape that this bone has to be part of a spine?" asked Pa excitedly. "Now try to imagine how large the creature must have been to have a spine this big, and it's buried in the cliffs out there just waiting for us to find it." Now, as Joe stood at the cliff, another feeling took hold, that of dread. What if Captain Curry stole his great discovery? Joe would never forgive himself if that happened. But how could he keep a find this size a secret? Joe searched the rocky beach for a suitable marker and found it in a large slab of shingle. He dragged the fat piece of rock over to the cliff and placed it at the base below the eye. Captain Curry was crafty. "We'll have to be crafty too," thought Joe, scuffing at the rocks and pebbles to remove his tracks from the rocky shore. Then Joe took off for home. He hoped that the captain hadn't been watching him from the cliff top. He often did that, scoping out the scene to see who was making some great discovery that he could swipe. Joe didn't dare look back in case it was true. When Joe told Mary and Ma about what he'd found, Mary immediately grabbed her coat and was out the door. "Are you coming, Ma?" asked Joe eagerly. "I'll see the beast soon enough," she replied, sounding lighter than she had in months. "Besides, I've got supper to get." Joe and Mary tromped along the beach, watching where they placed their feet while keeping an eye on the cliff tops. Fortunately, Captain Curry didn't seem to be around. The sea was creeping in. There wasn't much time before high tide swept onto the beach in full force. At the cliff, Joe scraped away the seaweed he'd used to cover up the shingle marker. He pointed to the round shape etched in the cliff's face. "It's the monster's eye, isn't it?" Seeing the curiosity again made Joe shiver. He needed Mary to say it was indeed the creature and not just his wishful thinking. Mary stared at the eye, then merely nodded. Finally she spoke. "'Tis indeed the creature, Joe. Last night's storm uncovered it." Mary tried to imagine how huge the fossil must be to have an eye this size. She stood on the slab and reached up high to touch the shape's rough surface. "Do you think it's the whole beast, Joe?" she asked. "How will we free it?" Joe shook his head. "I don't know. It's a powerful amount of work. I wish Pa were here. He'd know what to do." Mary was about to suggest that Elizabeth Philpott might help when Joe tugged at her sleeve. "Don't look now, but the captain comes into view up top, and he's seen us." Captain Curry was short and barrel-chested. He wore an old canvas coat that came to his knees, and he walked the slippery shoreline using his spade as a walking stick. The captain had a nose for discoveries, especially those that belonged to others. You had to be clever to outwit him. Now the wily hunter expertly picked his way down the pathway. Soon he'd reach Church Cliffs Beach, and then it would be over. Their secret would be out. Before that could happen, Mary jumped into action. "Turn your back to the cliff, Joe, and I'll steer him away." Mary began to meander toward the sea, keenly studying the beach as she walked. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw that the captain had taken the bait and was following her. Suddenly, Mary dropped to her knees. She'd caught sight of something. With energy and focus, she began chipping away at the rock. "Hey, ho, you, Anning lass!" Captain Curry's shout boomed above the sea's pounding surf. "Found summat, have you?" Mary had found something. It was a griffey the size of her hand, the largest she'd ever seen. "I have," she muttered, working to free the curiosity. The captain peered at the griffia. He'd never seen one this big either. It would sell like a hot griddle cake in Karma. Joe, meanwhile, when he was sure that the captain wasn't looking, had carefully covered the eye with wet sand and seaweed. The captain aimed the blunt end of his spade at the fossil. "Let me tackle that toenail for you," he offered. "I'll dig it up right quick." Mary jumped up and pushed the spade away. "Not like that! The Griffey won't be worth a thing if it's in pieces." Captain Curry gave the scrawny girl before him his fiercest look. His bullying tactics rarely failed, but Mary was far from backing down. "Miss Mary," he said menacingly, "your pa would be none too proud to see you give an old man grief over a common curiosity." "It's my find," Mary replied firmly, though the comment about pa stung. "It isn't as common as all that, and you know it." Before Captain Curry could shove Mary aside, Joe grabbed the old man's spade. "You'll not thieve from us today, Mr. Curryman." Mary went back to the work of freeing the Griffey. She followed the fossil's lines and left a margin. Later, she would remove the excess rock with chisel, brush, and pick, and plenty of patience. Captain Curry's next words stopped Mary cold. "I saw the two of you mighty captivated by yonder cliffs," he said, nodding toward Church Cliffs. "I'll find what it is you stumbled upon, though you be hiding it. I got the nose, you see." Captain Curry tapped his nose and then turned, muttering and tromping towards the cliffs that held the rare fossil. Joe started to follow Captain Curry, but Mary pulled him back. "Don't," she whispered urgently. "If you act to protect it, he'll twig that we're hiding summit. Then he'll not give us peace until he's stolen it." Mary and Joe watched as Captain Curry scouted the cliff face, walking to and fro, stopping once in a while to take a closer look. They held their breaths when he stood for a long while, gazing at the very spot where the fossil lay hidden. But then he turned to leave, not seeing anything out of the ordinary, and Mary and Joe relaxed. If the captain found the eye and claimed the discovery as his own, Mary didn't know what she'd do. This fossil would save her family from the poorhouse, and she was bound and determined that the find should be all theirs. Meanwhile, the young fossil hunter got busy wrapping her Griffey in a rag. "Perhaps the Curryman's eyesight isn't as sharp as yours, Joe," she said with a smile. "Perhaps," replied Joe, but he wasn't as hopeful. Heading home, Mary and Joe looked back only once to see if the captain had lingered at the cliff. They were relieved to see that the incoming tide had chased him back to the footpath. But tomorrow was another day and another chance for Captain Curry to find them out. Joe and Mary needed to be sharp to protect what was theirs. They knew it wasn't going to be easy.